Now, this is something that we have to talk about. If you have no heat coming from the vents in your vehicle, I have to ask you a question. Is there air coming from the vents, but it doesn't feel warm or hot? Or is there no air coming from the vents? This can go one direction or the other. If you have no air coming from the vents, we're going to talk about that. That has to do with your blower motor system. So of course we'll talk about how the blower motor system works and some common causes of why you might have that issue. Once we've completed that, we're going to talk about that you do have air coming from the vents, but for some reason it's not hot. This is another issue and it's a totally different category. It could be coolant related, but it might be something different. Let's start with there's no air coming from the vents. Now in this instance, pretty much everything's going to be located inside of the passenger compartment. Of course, we'll talk about how the system works. So you turn on the switch, it's supposed to power the system. Of course, there is a different range speed. You can start from low all the way up to high. If the blower motor doesn't turn on, there's no air. Now, if there's no power, of course, it could be an issue with the fuse, it could be an issue with the switch on the dash, or it might be something located underneath your dash. In most instances, you're going to find that you have a blower motor resistor and your blower motor right next to each other on the passenger side of the vehicle, just underneath that glove box. Now, once you get under there, of course, you'd want to do quick diagnosis. Make sure everything's plugged in the way it needs to be, nothing's loose. Aside from that, you definitely want to make sure that you test for power in each of these areas. If you found that your blower motor only worked on the high setting, on the blower motor switch, that's telling you that the blower motor resistor is bad. It's essentially not causing any resistance down to that blower motor. If you found that you had an issue with the blower motor where it was restricted in some way or bound in some way, maybe a rodent made its way inside there and left some debris, it's going to cause extra resistance and it's going to cause an issue with the blower motor resistor. Now, one last thing I would think about for this is, have you checked your cabin air filter? If the cabin air filter is dirty or it's been damaged in some way, of course debris is going to make its way down to that blower motor. Now we can talk about you have air coming from the vents, but it's not hot and it's barely warm if anything. There's a couple different ways this can go. It could be an electronic issue, which we would be inside the passenger compartment. We'll talk about that first. Or it could be a coolant related issue. Now, of course, you will have a temperature control switch. It can look different vehicles, right? On this, of course, we would want to make sure we have it in the hot setting. If for some reason it doesn't change the temperature coming from the vents, it might be a blend door issue or it could be the switch here. Now, if it's a blend door issue, it might be either the blend door itself is bound in some way. Maybe somebody put something inside one of the vents. It gets caught inside the blend door. So of course the actuator can't function like it should. It could also be that actuator. The actuator is supposed to function the blend door. That's going to pivot and make sure that only hot air gets diverted to the vents rather than cold. If either of these are the issue, of course you're going to have cold air. Now let's talk about coolant related issues for this. Let's get under the hood. So now as we make our way under the hood, obviously we've talked about a lot of things so far. If there's anything that you're interested in knowing a little bit more about, of course we have thousands of helpful videos, and of course you can check out our site for any parts that you want. As far as coolant related issues, you might have an issue where the coolant is either low, your system might be clogged, or there could be one other issue that I'm going to get to in the end here. But as far as the coolant being low, why would it be low? More than likely you have a leak. There's going to be several different areas that you want to look for a coolant leak. Typically, most of them are going to be under the hood, unless of course you have rear heat in your vehicle. Some vehicles do. With that said, of course the areas that you want to pay attention to would be along the engine. You're going to have a water pump. You're also going to find that you have a radiator along the front of the engine compartment. There's going to be hoses in between. Inside the firewall area that's actually inside the passenger compartment, you're going to have a heater core. That's another area that you could potentially have a leak, but it's a lot less likely. Now, since we mentioned clogged, and we're talking about the heater core, this is a common issue why you might not actually have heat inside that passenger compartment. If your coolant was contaminated in some way, or it had something inside of it, maybe you added an additive to fix a leak, it's going to clog your heater core. At that point, any air that the blower motor is trying to circulate through the heater core isn't getting warmed, so it's really only circulating cold air. If you have a clog on that heater core, you could try to clean it out in some way, maybe flush it, or of course you'd want to replace it. Now let's talk about our last issue, and that would be a constant flow of coolant in the cooling system. Now for this, it's going to be a thermostat related issue. If your thermostat is stuck in the open position, the engine's never going to reach normal operating temperature between 195 and 220 degrees. Even if it did, by the time the coolant circulates all the way around through the radiator, which is going to be constant because the thermostat's stuck open, it's never going to heat up the heater core enough to warm the air making its way out of the vents.